Hello and welcome to How to Win the Lottery You module. Now, Shreds, before we get into what even season 5 trailer for You is out, the final season.
Hey, right. Yeah.
Are you excited for this?
Joe, back at it again.
It seems like the sins of his past are really going to come to haunt him this season.
That is what it seems.
I gleaned all that from one headline.
What are your takes on, like, okay, so I'm going to give you a rundown of it. How do you feel about Victoria Pendretti?
Enjoy her.
What do you enjoy her from?
Mostly like Hill House and stuff, like those things. Like I don't like know her from a ton of those, but she's good in those.
Yeah. She's great. I love her. And you have absolutely zero memory of Jenna Ortega being in season 2 of that show. And do you have any memory of the pervert guy?
Well, you mean Joe?
No, the stand-up comedian. I forget his name.
Oh, Crystalia.
Yeah, Crystalia.
From season 2.
Yeah.
I don't think
you have no memory of him being in it. So you haven't really watched this show.
I watched the first 2 seasons years ago.
I told one of the guys from school that I watched it.
Yeah.
And he just goes, that show's for girls.
Mm-hmm. Was it a student or a teacher who said that?
It was a teacher.
I don't know if there's no reason for you to remember, but like years ago, I was like, because, okay, as we're recording this, Severance is out now, weekly episodes. We're still not even talking about what book we're talking about, but you said releasing the way that TV was meant to be released weekly.
Yes.
You and everything else on Netflix for the most part, overwhelming majority released weekly, or released all at once.
Yeah.
Years ago, I was like, I want to like force myself to watch this as though it were out on Monday nights or whatever.
Yeah.
And so you were like, watch one show on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, take the weekends off. That, like, years ago, that's when I was watching You. Like, that was 4 years ago or something. And I watched a little bit. I'm just like, this format doesn't work.
Didn't work for you.
Because I'm not like looking forward to watching You. I didn't really enjoy it. I wanted to see it. Because at one point it was in the zeitgeist. It is no longer in the zeitgeist. You were the only person I know personally who has watched the show in the last 3 years.
Well, and like, to clear up for listeners, I am watching the show along with a bunch of other trash television.
Yes.
Because I'm a depressed person.
And I just sit on the
couch. And I just sit on the couch and watch TV.
So we are talking now about If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler. So it's not a TV version of this, but the Andy Daly podcast pilot project was basically If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler in a different sense.
How so? Oh no, yeah.
The original idea of that podcast was
yeah.
every show was the pilot of a different podcast.
Right.
In this book, the theme is...
There's also a show that predates the Andy Daly podcast pilot project called E1, which is episode 1, which every episode...
Is that a podcast?
Yeah, it's really funny. And actually one of the authors, one of the guys on the show is a guy named Alex Branson, who is a very talented writer. He wrote a book called Water Wasted and another book called Into the Hills, Young Master. So he's a great writer. I'd love to talk to him on the show at some point, but he's a very, very funny person, and that's a really funny podcast.
So the idea behind this book is that there's 2 things. There's a through line narrative, which kind of becomes crazy and elaborate by the end of the text.
Sort of hard to track.
Also, in between each of those is the first chapter of about a dozen books.
Yeah.
That, when strung the titles together, sort of forms a sentence that is also the intro to another book or story or something.
And
by Italo Calvino.
And the content of those individual chapters informs the aesthetic of the overall narrative going on. So as we move into books that are like thrillers or spy novels or whatever, or romance, then the content of the second person chapters mimics the aesthetics of that.
There is also something where it felt true for a while and then didn't feel true by the end, but it felt sort of like a Cloud Atlas kind of thing or a Beast kind of thing, where it's like there's always a man and a woman caught in a will they, won't they, where it feels like mirroring the real life version of it. And then with him and Lumella, and then by the end, it doesn't really. Yeah. But I was like, oh, this kind of feels like it's all like the same archetype or something in just like a spy thriller or like a 70s like spy. It's also spy thriller, but like all those like different whatever, or like a wartime thing or whatever. And then it just kind of does its own thing. Yeah.
What did you think of the use of second person?
Well, you said to me before I started reading it that the first chapter is like an all-time great.
Yeah.
The book starts, if you have not read it yet. You are about to begin reading Italo Calvino's new novel, If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler. Relax, concentrate, dispel every other thought. Let the world around you fade. Best to close the door. The TV is always on in the next room. Tell the others right away. No, I don't want to watch TV. Raise your voice. They won't hear you otherwise. I'm reading. I don't want to be disturbed. Maybe they haven't heard you with all that racket. Speak louder. Yell, I'm beginning to read Italo Calvino's new novel. Or, if you prefer, don't say anything. Just hope they'll leave you alone. And it's so good.
Which the poet Russell Swenson, who's a very funny, very talented poet, in his review on Goodreads said, I like to think this is Calvino's way of saying it's Britney, bitch.
Yeah, it is. So is this his most, before I go into the question you asked, is this his most well-known book?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Cosmic Comics is pretty well-known too, but I think this is his most well-known.
This wasn't his first book though, was it? Or was it?
No, he's an established writer.
Can you imagine if like a guy straight off the street was just you're about to read Shred's new novel? It's like, well, who Shreds?
Yeah,
it's
that's like a shot across the bow right there. Like,
but it could work.
I guess so, yeah.
But
you just the confidence. Shreds doesn't have that kind of confidence. I thought about introducing myself as, I forget the name. I was going to introduce myself as Satoshi Nakamoto or whatever. The
Bitcoin guy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And try to like pass myself off as him.
No one knows who he is. That documentary thought they did. It's not him.
Right.
I think the second person works really, really well in the beginning. And I think it sort of waxes and wanes throughout.
Well, it's interesting because it's like this is I heard my voice go really like intense there. So you're going to have to take that down like a level on the...
they love it when you get intense on the podcast.
I think like something that's interesting about this book is like a very masculine book, right? It's a book that's like very much like male perspective on something that is like, I think like totally genderless because it is a book about reading and it's a book that's like about the joys of and like getting swept up in narrative, but it is also like a book from the perspective of like a kind of horny dude who is like
where it kind of
like not like all that savory either. Like he's like a little like kind of like a gross horny dude.
Well, there's like it's like the one where it's like the Japanese area, whatever, and it's like he's attracted to both the mother and the daughter at the same time. It's just like it feels like especially perverted in a way that is like I think this book is very funny and I really enjoyed it, but there's some of that where like I'm not like put off by it. I'm just like you don't need this here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, not to be
those are your favorite parts.
Too openly racist, but Italians are perverts.
Well, yeah. No, I mean that's not racist. It's not racist if it's true.
But like so what's interesting about that to me is that there is the use of second person in place of like something that is so specifically a type of person is now like, I don't know if is the assumption that everyone reading this book is a dude, is the assumption that we can cross those boundaries through the use of this perspective. Cause like it's very purposeful in something like Interior Chinatown.
Right.
And I have to assume that it's purposeful here, but it also just might be like a hyper-focused version of male privilege.
Well, I also think, you said that he was an established author by this point. Like, whatever they used to measure this in whenever this book came out, like, well, it'll 82% of your readers are male. He's like, let's just, write to them or whatever. Yeah. I also think, and I don't know, because I don't remember what else is here, and I'm sure I think I remember there are other books in translation later, but there's another specifically interesting element of the second person where like he's talking about using the two as in the personal form, not the formal form.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is something we don't have in English.
Yeah.
But it's interesting in this text that it's translated from Italian to English, but they still like say like that's still part of the thing. It's like you're using the two form already. Like you're already comfortable with this person. It's just like that's a thing that does not exist in our language, but still exists in the book, and is like especially interesting given the scope of the module.
Yeah. That's something that I didn't really give too much thought to. This idea of the, well, I guess, I don't know in Italian, but in French it's tu and vous. Vous is like the not familiar, how you would speak to your teachers and stuff.
I think it's like tu and maybe voi? I don't remember. I took Italian in high school, but it also jumbled in my brain with Spanish, and I don't remember either of them because whatever. But there's the same thing where it's like all those Romance languages have the formal and the casual, friendly, whatever.
Yeah, so we lose some of that in this because it's translated to English. I assume that the entire novel is in two.
Probably.
Because
especially like the stuff with Ludmilla and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Ludmilla? Anyway.
Yeah, it's probably Ludmilla.
I really enjoyed the book. I think it's very funny. I think it's one of the funniest books we've read in a while. I also think stylistically, we were saying both by the end, like it tracks, like the narrative matches the whatever. By the end, it felt like a sort of a Terry Gilliam thing where there's like this needless bureaucracy, which is very funny, but not exactly what I love about it. But like cops talking about, well, like we export our banned books to that country.
Yeah.
And they export their banned books here, but they're ultra banned here and ours are super banned there. But it's just a way for us to like work together and practice cop stuff. And just like that's so dumb and funny. Or like the fact that like banned books wind up in prison because like where else would they be? It's just like to put the books in prison. Like there's like very silly stuff like that doesn't really isn't my type of humor, but also I find funny.
Well, yeah, there's also the like I guess Kafkaesque is the best way to put it. The like Kafkaesque idea of the government bureaucracy and police, where it's like everyone there is like a double agent, triple agent, and like you don't know, like, oh no, that cop is one of our good cops. How do we know that he's one of our good cops? Because he talks with us to get in there, but this other cop is not. This other cop is pretending to be a criminal, but he's actually a criminal pretending to be a cop, and it's like very, very confusing, but also like maybe kind of how the real world works a little bit.
Probably. And there's also like that with like the like removing layers of clothing and being like, well, I'm actually who, whatever.
Yeah.
The beginning of this book is better than the end, I think. And there's also something very funny and I think intentionally done where he's talking about like at the end where there's like a bunch of readers talking about the act of reading and they're all like, man, like the beginning of books are always good. Like by the end, like people lose the train of the thought and they like lose the plot.
Yeah. Also, I mean, how much of that is the book saying like, or like I'm asking you how much you think this is the case, where the book is like, the good thing about it is that it's got the gimmick that it uses.
I think so.
That it uses to draw you in. And then once you've figured out the gimmick and once the gimmick is done, it's like, well, there's only really so far that this can go before it's just sniffing its own farts.
Right.
Which is the problem entirely with postmodernism.
Right.
My friend Eric, who like wrote an entire PhD thesis thing on postmodernism and sincerity and stuff, in his dissertation, he had like a separate section. It was like a footnote thing that was like noting how many times postmodernism is described as like a bird flying up its own ass. And like that really is like what's going on here. It's like you appreciate something for being clever, and then it's like this book necessarily has to be short, because if this book were 700 pages of this gimmick, you would just be by like page. How long is this book?
Like 260.
260. If this were like a 300-page book, you'd be like enough already.
Yeah, like I'm like at the limit, like where it, like he ends it sort of at the right place, and like if he ended a little bit sooner, I think I would have liked to deal a little bit more.
Yeah,
but it's
yeah. There's only so much that you can do. I mean, and there are other books that are like Tristram Shandy is a really, really long book, and that like I think also runs out of gas. But it's like he is.
What's the gimmick with that?
Tristram Shandy is like telling you the story of his life, but it's like from his birth.
Okay.
And he's like, it's like a very, very meta book that has a lot of like interruptions about like, well, here's like why this is happening.
Sure.
Here's what I needed to do narratively to make this work. But it's also way earlier than this book. So it's like when it was happening, it was like, oh, this is all very novel and shocking to readers. And we didn't even know that you were allowed to do this.
Right.
So maybe you get away with like having a much longer book in that circumstance.
Well, I think like what's both fun and frustrating, depending on what you're reading in here, is that like this reminds me sort of, or it could remind me of like you go to like a comedy like when our friend Bleep got married in Scotland and we went to like the Edinburgh Fringe Festival and like we were like, we want to see a show.
Put friend in quotes there. Keep going.
And we were like, well, we want to see a show. And I'm like, why don't we just see like this like 45-minute thing where it's like 9 different acts doing 5 minutes. And like, it's supposed to be like a teaser trailer sort of thing where it's like, if you like this duo, you go see their show or whatever. And it feels like this book could be that, where it's like, this is the first chapter of 12 different books that exist. And if you like them, go read that book. And it's not that. There's never more of this. And some of the stories I don't care about, but there was that one where the guy is running and like the phones are ringing as his. I'm like, this is so good.
It's like very Charlie Kaufman.
And then he gets to like, he finds the woman and like she's bound. He like saves her or whatever. And then it ends. I'm just like, I want more of that.
Yeah. Which is like what the book is doing, right? Because as the reader, as you're supposed to, when you get to the end of those, you're supposed to go like, like, what are you doing?
Because like some of them feel like short stories where like it's like the natural conclusion, but it also feels like sometimes like this is the start of a thing. And they're all, like, to his credit, they're all written in like pretty different styles.
Yeah. He's part of a group called Oulipo, which George Perec is also a part of.
Okay.
And Oulipo, I don't know if Oulipo is very much like Dogma 95, right? Do you know Dogma 95?
Yes.
So it's very much like Dogma 95 in that they are attempting to be significantly more creative by placing restraints upon what they can do. And whether that's with George Perec, like you can't use the letter E, or if it's with Harry Matthews, it'll be like every chapter has to be about a person masturbating or something like that.
Speaking of, side note real quick, Ethel Cain's new album has a song called Onanism.
Sure.
And I was like, Margaret, do you know what this means? She's like, no. I was like, let me tell you, because Shreds told me.
Organization of North American Nations. Sure. Yeah.
One who masturbates.
Yeah, Onan from the Bible who pulled out and jacked off on the floor.
Sweet.
That's the
spilling a seed.
Yeah, classic. And then maybe was punished for it because you're not.
You can't jack off the Bible and not get punished.
You're not supposed to jack off on the floor. Yeah, and so like he's part of this group of people who is like very interested in like formalism. Like he wants to create formal restraints, and he thinks that like through formalism you can embolden experimentation, which is so funny because like when you think of people like Walt Whitman, one of the major figures in like the development of sort of free verse poetry in the 19th century, like what people hate about him is that he's so experimental because he's breaking down the formalism and saying like, look, we can do anything. You don't have to like have these. It doesn't have to be rhymed or metered or like you can still use these. Like he uses parallelism a lot and stuff like that. But like you can use all of these tricks, but like they don't have to fit into any box. And then you have people like Calvino or Matthews or Perec or like any number of other guys that are like, no, the box is what's fun. Like we have to figure out how to like function within this box because too much freedom leads to sort of this undisciplined kind of writing that where you end up not being creative because you end up writing stories like Jack Kerouac where it's like here's my like thoughts
rambling
about,
whatever
and which is like I have no take on the value of that. I think that Kerouac has his value and has his place and it's good that we have both things, but I love the Oulipo stuff because it's so interesting to say like, oh no, you actually can't do that. Mm-hmm. And then you have to like rethink a creative way around that problem. And something that is very effective at doing is like forcing writers to create different styles. Mm-hmm. And Calvino, I think, is very gifted at that. He's writing thrillers that are you like, I want to read those thrillers.
Yeah.
I want to read his comedies. I want to read his like sex dramas,
Do you have a preference between sort of like how the novel, like the stuff that's like more, I guess, more grounded early on and the stuff that gets like weirder later on? Do you have a preference between, or do you think it all just is part of the whole? Both like within like the ongoing narrative and also the like the stories that we're reading.
Yeah, no, I like it when it gets weirder, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Because do you feel like it feels like there's a direct connection to Charlie Kaufman to me?
Probably. Where just like it's building absurdity on its own world. Like the world within it has like rules that we just don't necessarily understand, or they're not our rules.
And those rules, because we don't understand them, like tend to lend you toward paranoia.
Yeah.
And toward like a kind of, if not paranoia, anxiety, because you're just like, oh, what? Why? How is this happening?
Well, because I think it starts like like there's like the typical like spy thing where it's just like two guys are gonna like you bump into each other like at a train station or whatever, and they're gonna exchange briefcases and like it's gonna move on. Like that's like the most boring.
No. Well, okay, so you're definitely allowed to have the opinion that's boring, but like I love that shit.
But I'm not saying boring as a negative. I'm saying boring as in like that's the spy thriller thing.
Yeah.
Where it's like two guys with identical briefcases, but then like that goes wrong or whatever. And then by the end, it's just like there's countries that don't exist and languages that don't exist and banned books and like societies and rules and regulations and things that just again all make sense within the context of the thing. But like there's no grounding for where we are.
You can also like tell, I think that you can tell that like Calvino is having so much more fun with the like Sumerian, like whatever the other thing is. Like, oh yeah, they have this, this country was conquered and then now like it's illegal to have these kind of, like he's got way more interest in that and the linguistics of like the idea of this language that's been banned or maybe didn't ever really exist, or we don't necessarily know. Like, he's way more interested in that than he is in the guys mixing up their briefcases at the train station.
Right. Well, especially like, because that seems like he almost has to like change the rules of that a little bit to like have fun with it, where it's like he puts a twist, because it can't just be that, it has to be more than that a little bit. But then like that also ends. We never come back to that. And, like, that's also the most grounded of all of them. And
but he's like applying the logic of genre to this like commentary on language, right? Because a lot of this book is about, you know, like language, like all things.
Yep. As all of your favorite books are.
Yeah.
How many of his books have you read?
I think 2. I think this and Cosmic Comics.
Do you know much, like, what is his other stuff? Is his other stuff as like daring as, or you don't?
Okay. I think he's pretty inventive, I think.
Because he's an author who actually, coincidentally, the friend that I was saying before, who like lived in Ohio before we started recording about Ohio and LeBron and whatever, and calling him Pippin, also loved Calvino.
Oh, interesting.
And so he was like, forever ago, he's just like, you should read these books. And like, I bought them and just never read them. But like, that's just like a weird, like, he was, because I don't know how popular he is, but like, he's the only person I've ever heard until this talk about this guy.
Well, I think Calvino is in some ways, and this is like, absolutely not insulting your friend here, but I think Calvino is like, sort of like baby's first academic book.
Well, I figure it's like, just like, oh, you got like Charlie Kaufman's, like, you got to like, this guy's so weird.
Yeah. It's not like
like, it's good, but it's not obscure. Or
it's not obscure at all.
Yeah.
It's very much like something that like if it's obscure because people don't really care about postmodernism that much anymore in the academy. But like for a while he was like a go-to guy.
I just thought of a new possible, it's not going to be a segment on the show, but a thing on the show where we ask you, dear listener, in your ideal version of a bookstore, what would you want?
I had this conversation for like probably an hour yesterday with Meg and Heather.
Because I think, so there is a store in the town in which I live, a bookstore that opened that is so boring because it's mostly arts and crafts. It's mostly like gift shop and they have books. They call themselves a bookstore, but the books they have are boring and mainstream. And the things you find at every used book sale, that there's like 100,000 copies because they've printed 1 million copies and people just read it and they're disposable and they move on. And I was like, obviously my version of a bookstore, I think our version of a bookstore would be much more in line with like the types of things that we read on here, or the types of authors that we speak to on here and whatever. But I am wondering, people out there, email in lottery. You don't even email in about the books, just email in about like bookstores, lottery@cageclub.me. I'm curious what people, if there's a bookstore that you have that you love that does something well, because if there's something that no bookstores around you do that you wish they did, because like, I was like, cool, a bookstore is moving to my town. I'm just like, this is so sad. Like, this is not what I wanted. Like, it might as well not be there for like my purposes.
This conversation was, I had a long conversation about this yesterday. And I was thinking in some ways of Powerhouse Books, where Blake had his book release party. Because I really like that bookstore, but mostly here was my very quick description to Heather and Meg. I said it would be split level with the second floor, significantly smaller, but have tables and couches so people could read. I would also want to offer either free or sliding scale tutoring to local kids. I have no idea how that would work. First floor would have rollable stacks that you can clear for event space or book release parties, readings, and also have a projector to watch stuff on. And there would be a small office with a couch so I could sleep there if I wanted to. But could also hang out on it, and would probably have very few employees, maybe just some local kids. And in a perfect world, the office would be a separate room, but is mostly glass, so you could be in there but still pay attention to the outside world, with like no TVs or anything.
Yep.
Yeah, and I have like books, like I have my favorite bookstores. I don't think fit into that model really very much.
No.
But, you know, if you picture, I think like the office thing, I think like in my head, I'm thinking of movies like High Fidelity or Empire Records, where they have like these big spaces that are like not part of the store. But
well, I'm also thinking about, we just talked about it last episode, I think, right? The Jackie Chan movie that's Rumble in the Bronx.
Yeah, sure.
Where they have the office that like on the outside there's mirrors, but on the inside it's glass looking out, and like Jackie Chan's like checking his face out or whatever, and like there's
popping pimples.
The businesswoman in there like looking out. Like, you do that, just like mirrors, just like, oh no, it's just like guy in there sleep on the couch.
Well, I also went on a little rant about having, like, you know how record stores used to have little phone booths that you could listen to music in?
Yeah.
Having little phone booths or whatever that you could read books in, and then having enormous signs that say, do not jack off in the phone booths.
No Onans here. Because I think, like, if I walked into, again, you saying he's not obscure, Calvino.
Yeah, he's
but
not
if I walked
not
into the
the most
bookstore
obscure.
here and like his books are there, I'd be like, oh my God. Like that
Yeah,
feels
yeah.
like, even if it's not like obscure, it's like there's a level where like you're appealing to a different kind of demographic.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like they also put out a thing on Instagram. They're like, what books do you think we should buy and recommend? And I said End Zone because it's like such like a, again, approachable, whatever, a book I love. Like I'm not saying like Annex.
It's a great, yeah.
But it would be cool.
End Zone is a great book that is readable and that.
And then the books that she picked, I don't know most of them. And then she picked Project Hail Mary, which if you listen to our Project Hail Mary episode is maybe the worst book that we've covered in the show.
Not a fan.
And like, I like the
By the way,
Martian.
that guy that told me that You is for girls.
Yeah.
Loves Project Hail
Of
Mary.
course he does.
No, he's a good guy. I'm not
But it's like
hating on him.
there's something where it's like frustrating. That's like something you want really bad to exist and be cool.
Yeah.
And then get a version of that is none of those things. And it's like,
Yeah.
like it's like, oh, a movie theater's opening in your town, but they're only going to show Avengers movies. It's like,
yeah.
you're close. You're so close to being there.
Right.
But whatever.
Yeah, it stinks. I don't know. Anyway, Joey and I are going to buy a bookstore.
Is there point? Is there merit? Is there worth to go through the book in any more detail? Because like part of it is that like there's no connective tissue. There is, but there is not. Right? It's like each thing stands on its own. Even by the end, the interconnected thing that is the second person narrative feels each thing unrelated to the previous. In a way.
It also it starts to fall apart. In much the way that like most metaphors fall, like the Daniel Johnston song "Monkey in a Zoo," where he just says he's like a monkey in the zoo, and then in each verse it starts out like, yeah, that is like a monkey in the zoo, but by the time you get to the end of it, you're just like, wait, have you ever seen a monkey in the zoo? That's not what monkeys do in zoos. What are you talking about?
I will say though, the book I think ends in a really nice way. Where it feels like he also had that pulled out. It's like, just like you're in bed with Lamilla, you're married, and she's like, "Aren't you tired of reading?"
Yeah.
And then end a book.
No, that's 100% like he had bookends. He like had that first chapter in his head. He had that last chapter in his head, and he was like, "How do we get between these two?"
But like the last chapter, like the previous I don't know 60 or 80 pages, which is 4 chapters, 4 whatever. It's like it doesn't advance the Lamilla stuff at all. Like she like disappears.
Right.
But
I'll say that it does the problem with it, if you can call this a problem, because it's sort of a feature. It's less a bug than it is a feature. Is that postmodernism very rarely engages with matters of the heart.
Yeah.
Effectively, it is entirely about you figuring out
it's brainy
the like levels of sincerity and irony and the way that the puzzle pieces fit together, so that you can have like a view of reality. Right. And that view of reality rarely includes guts.
Yeah.
It almost always just includes like the neurons firing off to try to figure out a puzzle.
Because like what this book feels like it is going to be for a while is they read the book and then the second part of the book is just the first chapter of another book. Like there's like a printing error. That's when he meets Ludmilla. And like part of me was like they're going to be like uncovered. Like this is like I'm glad it's not this, because like my casting in my mind for this would be like a Zooey Deschanel thing, which like no offense to her, I like her, but like I don't need like a cutesy rom-com, but like where they're like trying to find the rest of the book or something.
Yeah.
And then it just like but I'm like I kind of like this, but I'm glad it's not that.
Well, there's a much more. There's a much more accessible book that like could.
That is that.
That is like, oh, this is clever, and then it becomes like something much more like.
But like it becomes a point where just
cutesy.
like he finds a new book and just starts reading the book, and then like as soon as he finishes the chapter, just like, well, that book's banned, you can't read any more of the book or whatever, right? So
yeah, and also like something that we haven't talked about yet is that like this this book, even though it's from 1979, I think, it like very much comments on generative AI.
Yeah,
which and he's just like, what? Why would you do that? Why are you feeding this computer this guy's work so that you can create stuff, and like, why don't you just go to the author and have him do the writing? Right. And they're like, well, because it's easier this way. And it's like, but it's not about being easy. Yeah. It's about like it's about like the expression of one heart's meaning.
Right.
It's not about like how can we crank out as much product as possible in any given moment.
I mean, like AI, not generative AI, but AI existed in the 70s. So like, people who knew anything about computers knew that that was like a thing that you could theoretically do.
Right. Yeah.
It just didn't generate things in real time, right? Or like write a novel in the style of Italo Calvino. Like just like, oh no, it's just like you would have to train it. Like that's like real like machine learning neural network shit where it's like back there as opposed to just like it's already been pre-trained.
Did you see the I think it's Douglas Cooper? Is that the guy's name? Douglas Copeland, not Cooper. He was giving a speech where he was like, about how he feels somewhat responsible for Elon Musk.
Oh,
because he and other science fiction writers of his era, he's like a Gen X guy. And he's like, I feel somewhat responsible for Elon Musk because Elon Musk is a dumb guy who read all of the science fiction writers of my era and took 100% the wrong ideas from and decided that this was what was going to be cool rather than this is what we were critiquing.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like, you can't blame yourself for like people like learning the wrong thing from a thing.
Yeah, but it's just like the people are going to learn the wrong thing. And it just so happens that the dumb people are the people who end up in power. And the people who are more willing to be exploitative end up in power. And so like, I think he was just expressing his regrets. He's not, I don't think he's like, I wish I never wrote any books or anything like that, but you know,
because it wasn't him, it would have been somebody else, right? Like it's
like, it's Judas Priest going like, oh, I wish we never wrote that song because that kid shot himself. It's like, well, you did, that's not why that happened.
Every time I think about that, I just think about the Mr. Show sketch of Titanica, or just like try suicide, then try again. Because like he jumps in the vat of acid and just his head, it stays across his head, but like the little tiny body's just like, well, try it again. Just
did you ever watch that documentary Dream Deceivers?
No.
You got to watch it, man. It's so good.
But yeah, I forgot. That's what that's about. The kid who killed himself?
He did not kill himself. He shot himself in the face and
lived.
Yeah. And his face is like pretty disfigured.
Is he in the doc?
Yeah.
Ooh. Okay. Well, on that note, let's read Egg's email.
Sure.
Or do you have anything else to say?
No, I don't know. I might have more stuff to say about the book, but read Egg's email. Maybe she'll.
We again have an email address, lottery@cageclub.me. Write in. Oh, we also have comments on YouTube too. Somebody on 300 million.
Yeah.
The video for 300 million by Blake Butler said, have you or will you look at Naked Lunch?
Yes.
We have not yet, but we will.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great American novel, right? So part of that is
that Burroughs?
Yeah. Part of that is, the roll of the dice, but like,
but it's on the list.
Yeah. Theoretically we would get there.
Okay.
But I don't know that could be years from now, but yes, we would. Yes.
We will say that it's not in the next Great American Module, which we always do in advance.
There's also the chance. I mean, I will cull stuff from the Great American Module to put in regular modules,
and then just
if it makes sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then it just won't be in the Great American Module.
We also had a comment, maybe the first positive comment on this video on the B.R. Yeager interview.
Yeah, is it the same guy?
No, a different guy. Not the guy being like, oh yeah, here's a receipt. It's like, no, that guy's a coward. He never came back.
What a coward.
Just finished it. I think I understood what he was trying to do. Don't know if the execution was there, but I'll be picking up negative space because I appreciate his unorthodox epistolary style.
I don't know if negatives. I mean, I don't know that I would trust that.
Whatever.
Everything is an epistolary style. I haven't read Negative Space, so I can't comment on that. But B.R. Yeager is a really formally interesting writer, and it's so funny. Like the comment, like, "Oh, I appreciate what he was trying to do, and I don't know if he succeeded." Like to me, it's like. That's like not even a negative comment because it's like if you look at like Prince albums outside of like Purple Rain, I think you can always see like what Prince is reaching for and not necessarily getting.
Right.
But it's still like those are still like the best albums ever made. So
yeah. There's also this is the first episode we're recording since our interview with Blake Butler was published, and there's an author named Derek Fisher. I'm assuming not the Laker great, but maybe, who said this is a great interview with Blake Butler. So you liked it.
Oh, cool. Yeah, Laker great Derek Fisher.
Anyway, here's Egg's email about If on Winter's Night a Traveler. Also, like I was saying, email in about any book we've done, any book you want us to do, or your thoughts on bookstores.
Yeah, we want to know about bookstores. Seriously, email us your thoughts on bookstores.
Lottery@cageclub.me. Here's Egg's email. This book was an example. Also, here's a question for you. In a bookstore, are we going to be like, also, there's an audio podcast about this book. Are we going to lean into the podcast or not let people know that there's a podcast? I think you have to let people know there's a podcast.
Yeah, maybe.
They'd be like, are you Shreds? Be like, you bet your ass
Yeah,
I'm
I will
Shreds.
never reel. I'll be like, I'm an employee.
Your voice sounds awfully familiar.
That's a lot of Muppets do, my man.
This book-
Because they're voiced by the same people.
This book was an example of me knowing what the author was doing, but I wasn't liking how they did it. Did you talk to her about this book or not really?
I know that she didn't really like it, but I'll also say about that, I think like that's the case of like
She's a girl, and this is a book for boys.
I was not going to say that. I was going to say I think that's often the case of like, again, postmodernism. Like once you're like, oh, I get it, then it's like, yeah, I can stop.
I thought you were saying before about like it is somewhat sexist and like horny.
I think it is. I think it is those things too.
That's what I thought you were saying.
But like I don't. You know, I don't
Egg right in.
I don't want to say that I don't mind a book being sexist because like obviously that's something that is like worthy of critique.
Yep.
But I think a book being sexist I think it's worthy of critique, which doesn't necessarily make it a bad book. It makes it a book that is like that you have to have criticisms of, which is fine. I think that's what literature is here for.
Yep. I knew the point of all the weird sex stuff was to discuss object and subject, but I didn't like that just about every instance was the woman who was the object. It felt a little gender essentialist to me.
Well, I mean, the nature of the English language, and the construction of sentences, especially like focused around sex. And a reason why you can make an argument that English as a language is inherently sexist is because the structure of it is subject, verb, object often. And the way that we've constructed how we talk about sex is often like he fucked her. Right. It like objectifies the woman like just by now you can say she fucked him and like I think that's like a totally acceptable way to say it. But like that means something different. I don't know that it should mean something different, but you have like a different idea in your head when those words are said.
What's being pictured or described.
And the idea of that, like the very idea that the construction of that sentence would change the meaning of that sentence shows you, I think, the inherent masculine nature of the English language. And again, something worthy of critique for sure. I agree with what Meg's saying, but that subject verb object thing is baked into English in a way that it might not be baked into other languages.
Well, so there is a thing going back to the generative AI thing that my boss talks about where in some languages there is a bias in terms of there is so much written about, I think in like maybe Arabic languages where like women can't be doctors, so that the word doctor is not gender, but it always equates with man. And so a lot of like the Google Translate stuff that they were trying to figure out like leading up to the current era of whatever was teaching computers that is not true. That doctors are not just men, nurses are not just women. Like there's so much like systemic
this reminds
societal.
me a little bit of something that I read recently, and you know way more about AI stuff, so you can correct me if this is incorrect. The idea that like a lot of generative AI, because it's trained on images on the internet, when people are making images on the internet, those images lend themselves toward sort of like pouting big-breasted women because it is training itself on so much pornography and things like deviant art.
What are
and
you
things
reading?
like that.
But yes, no, that's true.
Yeah.
But like my boss also like talks about AI bias in like if you just described, I don't know if it's still true, but like if you describe to like a thing like in text to image generator, young people watching a football game, what it would be is all men in bomber jackets watching soccer.
Interesting. Yeah.
And it's like because there's so much where like in most of the world, football is one thing. In most of the world, at least the vocal people online are typically young men that dress a certain way. And he puts the screen up in his presentations where it's like 4 different versions of the same thing, and they're all white guys in bomber jackets watching soccer, when the text was literally just like picture of a young person watching soccer or whatever.
Yeah. So it's interesting that the inherent like, and AI functions is a technology the same way that language is a technology. So like it's taking from culture the same way that language took from culture and established like those subject verb object things. Like it's like recreating a world that we exist. So it's enforcing all of these various stereotypes, and it's like unbelievably hard to undo all of that stuff. So I think it's interesting because I think like
And anything trained now will also be trained on stuff that was trained on stuff that was previously made. So it's only going to further amplify the same exact thing. Like if the most common version of that is like overwhelmingly the most common version of the new thing, then things past that is going to have just even more of the same pouty, big-breasted women that you like finding on the internet.
Or if you're going to be like picture of Sonic, it'll show you like Sonic, but Sonic's pregnant.
Sweet. I mean, that's a good technology. I mean, the book gets a little grace, Egg writes, because it was... Is that a good conversation to have in the middle of reading Egg's email? Yeah, maybe.
I mean, I think
she loves pregnant Sonic.
No. Well, I think it was commenting directly on what she was saying.
Sure.
So yeah.
I mean, the book gets a little grace because it was written in the early 80s, but still just not my cup of tea.
I think it was written in 1979.
I did see the Shreds gave this 5 stars on Goodreads, so I'm looking forward to the conversation about this.
Yeah, stars don't mean that much. There are 3-star books that I like better than this book, I think. So, like, I think we can discount the star rating as a meaningful metric. I gave it 5 stars because
it's trying a thing.
Yeah, kind of, and because it engaged me in its experiment that I kept me engaged in an experiment for 300 pages or whatever.
Yeah. This book felt incredibly horny, Egg writes, but nothing ever really felt, quote, consummated. I think the only intercourse we see is on the section of leaves illuminated by the moon, and in the sex scene, which feels a bit rapey, a vagina is described as her, quote, prehensile sex, which is the least sexy way to describe a vagina. This is also, I think, the only instance where a man is the, quote, object.
When she's, I guess I don't recall that scene as well.
There's also a cuck in this book, too.
As what Meg is saying, but like when she says it's rapey.
I can see that.
But what is that? Who... Is the man the object in that scene? Is she saying that the woman's raping the man?
Based on how she's describing, yes.
Okay, I guess I would reread that section before I have anything meaningful to say about that.
It would have been interesting, Egg writes, to be able to read this book in Italian. There were definitely things that got lost along the way, most obviously in the way of Italian masculine, feminine, singular, and plural second-person perspective pronouns. Just felt like it was a shame that there was a layer of wordplay that was missing in the translation, which we talked about a little bit before.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, that's this is the great boundary in all of literature, is not being able to speak every language and so not being able to engage. This is like the great, like, Shakespeare is inaccessible to so much of the world because of like the layer of wordplay within Shakespeare. You can't translate that to French or whatever.
Well, there's also something like in this text, there is talk about translation. There's 2 things in here that pop up aside from the language, but related to language. There's talk about translation, which, drive your plow over the bones of the dead. Like we've covered books that are explicitly about translation, but there's also something here that I like pointing out because I think it's funny, where this entire book is framed in a world where the only important thing is books and reading. Like people are just like, this is the most important thing in the world. Just like no one other than people who read books talk about books.
Well, it's like reaching out to those people and going like, I got you.
Yeah. It's like, aren't books great? It's like, yeah, books are great. But like every book, like not in every book, but like so many books we've read, the character's like pastime is reading. It's just like, okay.
Yeah. All right, I guess.
Something I did find really interesting, Egg writes, about the book was that as much as there was a distance of both time and translation, there was still an odd accuracy of some of the readers at the end. For example, the one reader says, quote, if a book truly interests me, I cannot follow it for more than a few lines before my mind, having seized on a thought that the text suggests to it, or a feeling, or a question, or an image, goes off on a tangent and springs from thought to thought, from image to image, in an itinerary of reasonings and fantasies that I feel the need to pursue to the end, moving away from the book until I have lost sight of it, end quote. Granted, this doesn't usually happen with all the books that interest me, but this was pretty much my exact experience of reading Ancient Oceans of Central Kentucky.
Oh, wow, yeah. Or like other books that, because Ancient Oceans is a book that I think we all agreed, like, we had a hard time on a page-by-page basis being like, here's exactly what's going on in this book, because like he would say something, then you'd keep reading, but your mind would be...
I think you are a better reader than me. You also read more than me, but do you ever like read, like I'm reading, I'm not thinking about other things, but like I'm just like reading through the words of the page and like all of a sudden I'm just like, I don't know what
that happens all the time.
That was that I read, and I have to go back up and
sometimes
whatever.
I don't go back up. Sometimes I just keep going.
Like especially like in Blake's, like where it's more vibey, but like this, like I think that a trick this book does, like also writes, all in all, I'm glad I read this, but I will probably not do so again. But I think a trick this book does is that early on it's like this is going to be plot, and then it becomes vibe.
Yeah.
In a way that like a lot of our books are one or the other. This is like, no, I need to reread everything because if I miss something of who someone is or where a book is or what happened to the book, I'm going to lose the plot. But at a certain point, it's just like, don't give a shit about the plot. Just it's vibes. Or maybe not saying that overtly, but it just feels more like, just experience it. Just enjoy it.
Yeah.
It's different. Reading is different things. And just keep reading those different things.
Fuck. Today's crime is. I didn't know that we were ending, so that was an abrupt ending.
We can keep going.
No. You did it. You pulled the trigger.
I undo
on the
it.
ending.
I gotta know how to say keep reading backwards so I can like undo it.
Today's crime is.
Do you want to respond to Egg's email first before we wrap it up?
Yeah, you were so eger. So eager.
You look at me with this face that you're like, I'm gonna say it.
You were so eager.
And I'm just like,
there.
but okay. We have to Egg.
What?
You were going to say something about Egg's email or about vibes, about plot, about not understanding or not following the text that you were reading.
It's fine. It's fine.
We're going to keep reading.
Today's crime is... How dark do we want to go with this? Denying an insurance claim for a pre-existing condition. Also, rest in peace, David Lynch.
Rest in peace, David Lynch.
I see you in the dark corner